Can you imagine a life where you don't have to think about loans, taxes, and paid hospitals, where everyone gets free education and neighbors are always ready to help? This is the kind of world that people who miss the USSR often imagine. But was it really so ideal? Let's find out why the past makes many people nostalgic and what we forget behind the rosy memories. Many who lived in the Soviet Union say that it was peaceful there, free schools and hospitals, stable salaries, and work for everyone. Families gathered around the same table, neighbors were friends, and there was always confidence in the future in homes. Such a past can indeed seem ideal, especially when compared to today's problems, from store prices to unemployment. In fact, the USSR was a country of contrasts. Yes, people were proud of great construction sites, free medicine, and space achievements. But behind this was a reality that many people prefer not to remember. For example, in the 1970s, there were 10 times fewer consumer goods per Soviet citizen than in the United States. This meant that the choice of clothing, appliances, or even groceries was extremely limited. People stood in lines for hours for the bare essentials. Soap, toilet paper, sugar, and even salt were often in short supply. The Soviet Union was the world leader in the shortage of essential goods. There is another nuance. People usually remember not the living conditions themselves, but the emotions they felt. The Soviet Union was the time of their youth, which means it was associated with the first victories, love, and friendship. These emotions paint memories in vivid colors, even if the reality was more difficult. And what else was hidden behind the showcase of Soviet stability? Let's break down what we've really lost and why much of the past can no longer be recovered. Plombier in the USSR was considered a treat for all times. It was dense, rich, and made according to strict GOSTs. But with the collapse of the Union, not only the technology but also the very equipment for its production disappeared. It's true, the recipe for real Soviet ice cream is lost forever. Even if you buy ice cream labeled according to GOST, it will not be the way you remember it from your childhood. That's the paradox. Today we have access to the best technology and ingredients, but we can't recreate the simple but unique things from the past. The flavor of ice cream has become a symbol of a time that is gone. The Soviet Union was rich in ideas and experimentation. Did you know that back in the 1960s, scientists were designing a vacuum train? This vehicle could travel at tremendous speeds using magnetic levitation. Such technology has only recently begun to be realized in the world, but the Soviet Union could be the first. The problem, however, was that there wasn't enough money for many such projects. The USSR's economy, focused on military spending and global tasks, often left little money to implement such inventions in real life. As a result, much of what could have been a breakthrough remained on paper. Things that were created in the USSR had their own soul. Furniture, appliances, even ordinary toys were made for centuries. For example, Soviet refrigerators often worked for decades, and grandmother's crystal sets still decorate the shelves. Today, many things are made for a short period of use. It's the difference between mass consumption and durability-oriented quality. But that's only part of what we've lost. Let's take a look at why the ideals of the past remain a dream, and why it's getting harder and harder to get them back. Everyone has heard the phrase, "In the USSR, everyone was equal." It sounds like a dream. Everyone gets the same salary. No one lives in luxury. Everyone has equal chances. But is this possible today? And is it true that equality was real? In the Soviet Union, the gap between rich and poor was really small. The average salary of an engineer or a doctor was not much different from that of a worker. Apartments were given out for free. Medicine was also available to everyone. It would seem to be an ideal system. But there was another hidden world. High-ranking officials had access to closed stores, elite villas, and foreign trips. For ordinary people, this remained an unattainable luxury. For example, in the 70s, each Soviet citizen had about $200 a year, while in the United States, this figure exceeded $8,000. This did not mean that everyone in the USSR was poor, but the choice was severely limited. Education in the USSR was indeed free, and that was something to be proud of. Schools and universities gave strong knowledge, thanks to which the country was becoming a leader in science. However, not everything was so simple. If your family did not belong to the right circles, the way to prestigious professions such as diplomacy or management was practically closed. For example, many talented students from villages or working families remained in secondary roles because the elite preferred to promote their own. What has changed now? Today, equality, like in the USSR, is really lacking. The gap between the rich and the poor in the countries of the former Soviet Union has become much larger. For example, there are more billionaires in Russia now than there were party elites with privileges in the USSR. But at the same time, modern society gives more opportunities to break through. You can study online, work remotely, and build a career in any country. But how did Soviet society cope? And why are the emotions of the past still stronger than the real facts? The human brain is an amazing thing. It has a knack for erasing bad moments and amplifying good ones. Studies confirm memories are often distorted. People tend to forget how difficult it was to stand for hours to get sugar, but enjoy remembering how they gathered as a family for tea with that sugar. For example, imagine running barefoot in the yard as a child. Now it is remembered as a happy time of freedom. But who will remember how you went to the store with empty shelves or tried to reach the only phone in the entrance? Today, more than 40% of Russians believe that everything was better in the Soviet Union. This is surprising because most of them either never lived there or were too young to appreciate the reality. These people see the USSR through the stories of their parents and grandmothers, who also talk about the good things, leaving out the hardships. For example, many mention cheap utilities and stability, but they rarely remember that in the USSR the lights were regularly cut off and hot water was given on schedule in summer. The fact is that memories of the USSR are most often memories of youth. Youth is always associated with joy, energy, friends, and life discoveries, even if this youth passed in difficult times. The USSR seems to be a symbol of those happy years, not a real epoch with its problems. Many people dream of returning to the USSR, imagining a world where everyone has equal opportunities, free housing, stable prices, and good neighborly relations. But is it possible to return to the past? The reality is that the USSR has remained in history, and here's why. The economy of the modern world works very differently than it did in Soviet times. The USSR was almost completely closed off from the rest of the world. Everything from food to cars was produced domestically. Imports were minimal, and the export of goods was strictly controlled. But today, globalization dictates its own rules. A simple example, the USSR produced its own cars, such as the Zhiguli, which met the needs of the time. And now look at our roads. Almost every car is made abroad or using foreign technology. It is impossible to bring all production back to one country. It would make goods too expensive and the quality would be weak. The USSR existed in isolation, but in the global world, such a model would not have survived even a few years. Trade, international projects, and foreign investments are the basis of the modern economy. In addition to the economy, life itself has changed. For example, the freedom of travel that we have now is absolutely incompatible with the Soviet system. In the USSR, foreign passports were issued only with a special permit. An ordinary person could not simply go abroad. Today, millions of people vacation on the beaches of Turkey or work in other countries. Now, imagine life without the internet. It was the norm in the USSR, but today, it's hard to imagine a day without messengers, online shopping, and news. The internet breaks down any boundaries, and the Soviet Union was built on a closed information system where news was controlled and alternative sources simply did not exist.